What's good, guys? This is Rio, and today I'm in a 2021 BMW X3. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm wearing a Laker jersey because we won the championship, and I'm hyped. RIP Kobe, let's go. Gotta get that out the way, gotta rep. But on to the review. I love this car, and I gotta start off by saying it. I really love this car, and I think in that compact SUV segment, this crossover segment, I think this is the creme de la creme of the segment. Now, I want to say something, which is that, okay, it's not the cheapest, it's definitely not the most expensive either, but I think the 4-cylinder X3, as this car is just the perfect middle ground of everything crossover-y. Sure, nowadays you have the X3M, the GL C63, you have cars like the SQ5, the Macan. On the lower end of the spectrum, you have CRVs, RAV4s, CX5s, you got Lexus UXs and NX. You got so many cars. But I think this car is the perfect balance of all of that. It's a little bit comfortable. Oh, we got a train. Metro. It's a little bit comfortable. It's a little bit luxurious. It's not crazy expensive. It has a good amount of tech. It's sporty enough. It's kind of this perfect middle ground. Now, I want to discuss a little bit more about this car in detail. So, starting off with the power plant, this is the S-Drive variant. It's actually the X line, which is hilarious to me because you have little X's in the door jamb, if you will. You have on the door sills, you also have X line written because trim-wise, it's the X line and not the M Sport. So, with that all being said, this particular car has a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, turbocharged motor, good for 248 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. Now, I will say that isn't amazing, especially considering other BMWs with the same motor, like the 330i, link up above, has a good chunk of horsepower more. It's not a ton more, but about 30 or 40 more. In fact, actually, it's more like 50 more horsepower. So you do get more power nowadays in the 330i, and I think this is now a touch below even the Q5, which is one of its closest competitors. But the good news is it is still pretty quick. It has an 8-speed ZF transmission, which is pretty common these days within the BMW lineup. On the exterior, because this is the X line trim, you don't get all the crazy body-colored, sportier appearance of the M Sport, but this car has upgraded 19-inch wheels, which I think really enhance the look of the car. They kind of remind me of X5 style wheels of previous generations, which is funny because this car has slowly grown into about a first generation, I think it's called the E53 chassis, X5 size. So I like the wheel choice, and it definitely is a very standout wheel. I love it for a more base car that has the plastic trim. In fact, it kind of goes along with that ruggedy look this car has going for it. You have the base LED headlights. There's an optional set of adaptive LED headlight, which looks definitely a little bit better, especially the DRL looks better. But both lights have pretty good light performance at night, so it's definitely not a deal breaker aside from the aesthetic difference. If you've ever seen BMW's new angular DRLs, this has the more angel eye looking DRLs. Out back, it has LED taillights. They look pretty cool. Nothing too spectacular, not quite as three-dimensional as some of the newer BMWs, but I actually prefer the look of these over, let's say, the X4, which is this car's sibling. The X4's taillights look really funky to me. They're too three-dimensional or too long and narrow. One of the things I really like about this generation of X3 is that they have the dual exhaust, one on either side, instead of just the twin tips on one side, something that they changed with this generation of X3. They've also changed that now on the 3 Series and the 4 Series versus having like an angular style tip for the M40i and then again quad exhaust for the official M variants. Now, I just hopped out of a Range Rover Evoque, which you guys won't see till next week, but a few things immediately stand out to me about this car versus that car, and it's 3 main things. First of all, it's visibility. This car has just way better visibility than that car because the window line is quite a bit lower, the greenhouse is larger, the rear windows are bigger, and the actual rear windshield is quite a bit bigger and has a lot more horizontal and vertical visibility out of it. The second thing I noticed is the quality of the buttons being used, even if it's just having like an aluminum plastic look, but looking aluminum, they feel a bit more solid, they look a little nicer, they're definitely nicer to touch. Some of the main touch points obviously being window switches, gear levers, start-stop buttons, the steering wheel, all feel a slight notch above the Range Rover. Again, you guys can check it out next week. I'm not trying to bag on that car. Check it out for sure. And the third thing that I noticed is that this car feels a bit more well-built and solid, while that car had kind of some of the panache of a Range Rover, which this unfortunately does not. It's a little bit more bland in that department. So moving on to the interior of this car, again, anyone who knows me knows it's no surprise that I love BMWs. So with that said, I'm a fan of it. I love the new generation of BMW interiors. I love the new iDrive systems and the Live Cockpit Pro. So yeah, this car has Live Cockpit Pro. Which was a kind of like an interior update, mid-cycle refresh that they did in 2020, adding in the Live Cockpit Pro and the new touchscreen BMW system that you can speak to. You can say, hey, I'm not gonna say it because I don't want it to talk to me. But yeah, so with that being said, you have a really nice cockpit. You have these, aluminum styled paddles, decently chunky steering wheel for a non-M Sport trim. You do get quite a bit of a chunkier, more sporty steering wheel in the M Sport trim. You do, however, still get sport seats in this base trim, so you have adjustable side bolsters, lumbar support, thigh support. The seats are mad comfortable, but also really you can tell they're performance oriented. If you want to push this car a little bit, this will kind of keep you nice and snug. Obviously, the majority of owners of this car will not be pushing it. The speaker system in this car does not happen to be the Harman Kardon, so it's definitely all right, not spectacular, but the Harman Kardon is very crispy, very nice, and I would say for about $875, which is I think what it costs as a standalone option, it's definitely worth it. Speaking of standalone options that are worth it, I would also say that ambient lighting is worth it for only $250. You get lighting strips here and across the dash and a few other areas to make the interior feel a little bit more special at night. And because it's only $250, I think it's just worthwhile. If you like it, you can change the colors around. For some people, it's really cool. For some people, it's tacky. Again, not a deal breaker. Now, other than that, the car feels very nice. The navigation is very easy to use. The touchscreen is very, very responsive. You also still have the controller down here. You have only a few hard buttons, which I like. You have the Sport, Comfort, Eco, Pro button, and you have a nice climate control system here, along with your radio controls and your 8 dedicated, it's 7 now, and your 7 dedicated BMW shortcut keys. So with all of that said, let's jump into one of my favorite parts of the video, which is the tall boy test, and then afterwards, we'll take this car for a drive, and I'll tell you guys a little bit more about what I like and what I think about it. So, without further ado, here's the tall boy test. So pulling this car out onto the road, one of the first things that I notice is how compliant the ride is. And this isn't a dig at any other cars in the segment per se, but this just seems to have itself so figured out. The chassis is like perfectly dialed in for a car at this price range. And it definitely inspires more performance driving than you would expect. Currently I'm in comfort mode and the steering's a little bit lighter than I prefer, especially within a BMW. But it's just, everything is so smooth and so seamless. I will switch it into different mode in a moment and I'll kind of see how that affects the car. So as I'm making the turn here, I will pop it into sport mode. Now this car has static suspension, so we're about to go over some train tracks and it's definitely gonna shake around a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, so I mean, a little bit more violent than I would love, but it's one of the setbacks of getting a car in this middle ground price range. So this car starts right around $43,000 and you'd have to spend another $2,000 to jump into an X-Drive, and then the M Sport trim is another several $1,000s. So these cars can actually easily reach the high 50s, but I believe this particular car is in the very low 50s. So it definitely has some options on it, such as the aforementioned Live Cockpit Pro. It has a nice sunroof, it has the LED headlights, it has the larger wheels. It also has a really nice safety suite. So this car can sense if you're drifting from your lane and shake the steering wheel. It has blind spot detection. It does not have adaptive cruise control, unfortunately, but it also has forward collision warning and a few other nice little touches that definitely help you feel like you're kind of taken care of while driving this car. Now that I'm in sport, I'm gonna give it a little gas and see. I mean, the car is definitely peppy, and I think that's due in part to the transmission. The transmission on these EFs are just, BMW knows how to code them just so well, and it makes the car better. I'm gonna actually put it into sport transmission as well. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not the fastest car you've ever seen. This car also is quite spacious. I'm not gonna go ahead and say that it's the most spacious, because I even think that the X5 that I've reviewed in this channel, again, I'll link it up above, isn't the most spacious, at least not in its segment. This is more than adequate, definitely very comfortable in the rear, and the rear seat has a little bit more structure than some cars in this class that have too much of a flat bench. So a bit of structure, a decently sized trunk. So with the sunroof, I think this car is a really nice compromise of having a panoramic. Some panos to me are too short in order to be able to open, and this car's panoramic sunroof extends quite far back while still letting you open the front portion of it. So I think it's a pretty good compromise compared to some of its competition. Another thing that I really like about driving this car is I like seeing a little bit of the hood. I like that the hood doesn't droop down immediately. One, that may just be a weird thing that I like, and I enjoy feeling like I'm in a car that has a little bit more of a aggressive bonnet design. But I really like the body lines that you have on the hood. You have these two really aggressive body lines, very similar to the X5, that you constantly kind of see when you gaze down at the hood, and they remind you of how much of a, you know, aggressive styling this car has, which it doesn't in every way have, but definitely on the hood side of things it does. But just like any car, this car has some of its own downsides, and I think one of the things I don't like is while you have such nice use of aluminum style plastics and even maybe some actual aluminum, you do end up seeing a little bit too much hard, scratchy plastic on the dash, a couple higher up areas around your legs. I mean, it's not terrible, but some of the plastic use could be a little bit nicer and does make this interior not feel quite as, let's say, premium as a Mercedes GLC, or at least a more loaded Mercedes-Benz GLC. I would take one of these over that car nonetheless, but it is something to note, and I know some people really don't find this interior to be as, let's say, nice, and I think the ambient lighting that I mentioned earlier would definitely help improve that. So truth be told, I would probably spring for an X3 M40i. While I love the actual full-on X3 M, haven't had the chance to drive one yet, but the X3 M40i I think is just delightfully sporty, performance-oriented, and for me personally, someone who, if I were to get an SUV, would want to still retain a little bit of that sporty nature, I would have to just swing for the M40i, very similar to an Audi SQ5 or a Macan S, or a GLC 43 for that matter. However, competing in the more broad spectrum of things with a lot of cars that don't even have a more performance-oriented version, I think this car still, for me, wins out. I used to kind of like the Audi Q5 more, especially in the previous generation, but in this generation, the X3 to me is the most complete package. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, what I kind of think is that it just happens to take so many different factors and maybe not be the best in any single one, but just do the best overall job of being well-rounded, having a decent amount of tech, having a good amount of luxury, a good amount of sportiness, and also price-wise being pretty nicely in the middle of the segment, especially compared to some of the really high-end stuff you can get with brands like Porsche and Range Rover if you want to compare this to the Velar. So with all that being said, I believe that this car is just a really, really nice vibe. It's just a really nice car, and it's something that I think if you're considering, it'd be very hard to go wrong. There are other options and other cars that maybe fit different lifestyles more than this car, but what I like about this car is that it's able to kind of do a lot of everything in a very decent fashion, and it leaves me kind of not wanting more from it in any specific area, at least not in a drastic sense. I would say the only thing is the engine, and an M40i would solve that for you. So I think in that $50,000 range, this is kind of the king of the segment. And with that said, I'm out. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tune back in for more. Thank you for watching. Peace. Also, let's go Lakers one time. Peace.